Tonight on the new reality,
Scores! What a goal!
the narrow world of sports.
If we can get the leagues going, we'll give them something to look forward to. And at a time like this, we need all the help we can get.
The risks of reopening too soon.
There's trillions of dollars that have been lost here. But at the heart of that is the public health problem. It is the virus.
COVID-19 conspiracy theories going viral.
You should look at the credibility of the people who are trying to convince you that they're right when they don't have any science to prove it.
A coming mall apocalypse.
We're going to see a big rethink in terms of what a quote-unquote shopping center really is.
And pandemic pets.
People are pretty interested in his day-to-day activities.
Hello, I'm Donna Friesen. We're all missing things about the way life used to be. Thousands of people, of course, have lost loved ones to COVID-19, and for them, life will never be the same. Others are yearning for just a bit of what life was like before the pandemic, something to lift our spirits, something to rally around. Sports is what does that for millions of people. Nelson Mandela said sports has the power to inspire, the power to unite people in a way that little else does. Sports, he said, can create hope where once there was only despair. We could all use some hope right now. Professional sports are working out ways to come back. Fans can't be there in person, but preparations are underway to drop the first puck and throw the first pitch in this COVID era. Eric Sorensen looks at how and when the games will begin again.
In golf, safe distance is easy when there's no gallery. Expansive fairways, and golfers don't have to get close to each other. A round of golf for charity went off without a hitch or a cough. And so the world of sports is getting back in the swing, pandemic or not. Car racing naturally separates drivers from one another. NASCAR gave us our first look at a major North American event in front of an empty grandstand. Baseball, already up and running in South Korea, can also be played with limited contact. But when European soccer kicked off once more, one thing became clear. You can't play contact sports without the contact. It looks and certainly sounds different in a cavernous stadium.
Basically, you have to have some integrity to the game for sure.
Bob Stellick is a veteran of sports marketing.
Well, there might be certainly a little emotion missing without having fans there, but I think guys will get used to it. I think they'll play hard. They'll be proud, play for pride.
In a society surrounded by a highly infectious coronavirus, the challenge is to cocoon the players and their games from the threat of contracting or spreading the disease. The NBA wants to pull its gargantuans from exposed public service to cloister the entire league at Disney in Florida. The NHL, in its own way, plans to isolate in 2 hub cities. League Commissioner Gary Bettman says the competition comes second.
I want to make clear that the health and safety of our players, coaches, essential support staff, and our communities are paramount.
Health protocols will differ, but the basics are, first, the outside world where COVID-19 is present. A transition zone where athletes and key officials will be tested repeatedly and verified to be COVID-free. And then the inner sanctum, where the games are played. It's hoped in a pristine setting, and close contact in competition is allowed and justified. With full-on contact, something frowned upon everywhere else, is there a risk? Yes, but it can be managed, says this epidemiologist.
We have to just get used to living with some uncertainty and a little bit of risk while we're in the pre-vaccine era of COVID-19. If there is a safe way to do it, and if the public health authorities deem that it's something that can be done safely, I think it's a completely acceptable thing to start back up again.
Disease specialists warn that if the virus spreads on a team, it could force a shutdown. But the aim is to prevent that. There may indeed be cases of COVID-19, but, says one NBA insider, the plan is to respond swiftly before it spreads and carry on.
The NBA would then isolate and quarantine that player, continue the daily testing protocols. They would have no stoppage of play.
Bob Stellick says the leagues can't allow themselves to be paralyzed by a single COVID-19 case.
The point right now is if someone does test positive, they can't shut the whole operation down. They have to be able to extricate that person and isolate that person. So, just like everywhere else, they're being extra careful.
What will be missing, of course, are the fans, the excitement they bring, and the billions they spend. The spectacle, just 1 year ago, Basketball diehards squished together in Toronto, no fear of contagion. Now it just seems like a bygone era.
How long will this stark new normal last, and at what cost? The three most valuable sports franchises in the country are right here, down the street at the Rogers Centre where the Toronto Blue Jays play, and here at the Scotiabank Arena, the Toronto Raptors and the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now the three Toronto teams, along with the Montreal Canadiens, are the only teams in the country valued at more than $1 billion, so a lot of money is at stake. It's estimated that the big leagues involved stand to lose $5.5 billion because of what happened this spring. More than $3 billion is from the fans. That's the loss of tickets and food and merchandise. And the other $2 billion is from TV revenue. Now they may not get the fans back, but there is money to be recovered from the television revenue, one reason why they want to come back this summer.
I don't think any business model could have anticipated this.
Richard Powers studies sports and business. He says without fans in the stands, thousands of jobs have been lost. And minor league and amateur sports are really suffering as the public stops buying tickets in communities everywhere.
They're very dependent on, literally bums in seats. There are thousands of jobs at risk here. Many of those won't come back without spectators in the seats.
But he says big leagues will get by because millions will tune in to see Connor McDavid and Sidney Crosby or Pascal Siakam and LeBron James fight for a championship, even in the wrong season.
The leagues, that means they keep their television revenues, they keep their sponsorship revenues. They're taking a significant hit, as we mentioned, with the lack of spectators, but at least with the sponsors and the TV contracts, they can make something out of what appears to be nothing right now.
The luckiest of the big league sports is American football. The pandemic arrived out of season, and the biggest enterprise in all of sport plans to restart on time in September. Major League Baseball is planning its season by playing half the usual number of games. Historically, a day at the ballpark was always seen as an escape from the bigger problems of the world.
The national pastime gets on the bandwagon. $800 million is the contribution of baseball fans to the bond drive.
During the Second World War, a very different crisis, baseball was viewed as indispensable to the morale of Americans, so Major League Ball kept going during the war. There may not be quite that sentimentality today, but big-time sports are an important part of the fabric of society, that we're in this together. And as the Toronto Raptors proved last year, sports can unify a lot of people around a bouncing ball.
Sport is a significant part of our culture, and we miss that. And if we can get the leagues going, I think people will really appreciate that. It'll give them something to look forward to. And at a time like this, we need all the help we can get to get through this pandemic.
For fans, there is a rhythm and a continuity in the sports calendar. You start the year and hockey and basketball are in full swing. You have big events like the Super Bowl. And then there's curling for some fans, March Madness for others. And here comes the Masters, baseball starts the playoffs. All kinds of events start up in the spring, except this year, a black hole. Everything disappeared. Now the attempt is to begin that rhythm again. Not just baseball in the summertime or the CFL, but basketball playoffs in July, the Indy 500 in August. As the NFL begins, so will the Kentucky Derby. And how about the Stanley Cup in the autumn? And some sports will not happen till next year. March Madness, Wimbledon, soccer's Euro Championship, and the Tokyo Olympics. The impact on sports will be felt for at least another year. And who knows how soon the crowds can come back to watch and cheer, whether it's professional or youth and amateur sports. And playing the games, they will be a matter of trial and error and risk, as long as the pandemic lasts.
There's almost no escaping the deluge of information about the new coronavirus. We're both confused and riveted, trying to work out what's real and important and what's not. And COVID-19 is acting as an accelerant to conspiracy theories. The digital era we live in is blended with an analog virus, a contagion that lingers on surfaces, waiting for a human host where it can replicate. Fear of this virus is powerful, and it's intensified all kinds of nefarious misinformation and disinformation that's spreading online. The result is an explosive force that could have catastrophic consequences.
You cannot make people wear a mask. It's not our laws at all. This is just made up by Bill Gates and them.
It is 2020, but at times it feels like we flash back to medieval times. Fear of an invisible enemy is everywhere, and it's making some people do crazy things.
Look it up for yourself. Go online and look it up.
Before coronavirus, we feared technology would overtake us, undermine us, create a world where we can't tell what's real and what's fake.
President Trump is a total and complete dip.
This deepfake video, for example, was made using machine learning.
Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. That's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources.
Today, it's not deepfakes and sophisticated technology that's insidious and destabilizing. It's a virus. An invisible enemy has swept across the world so fast and killed so many, even modern hospitals with the best technology have been overwhelmed. COVID-19 is moving faster than we can and has outsmarted our best scientists. We still have no effective weapon against it. That has sown fear and uncertainty, disinformation, misinformation, going viral.
Many there are spouting the same conspiracy theories that we hear in the United States.
Gaining traction all over the world.
There's a lot of psychological research behind why people find the simplicity of conspiratorial narratives appealing.
Renee DiResta studies how disinformation spreads online.
It's the idea that someone somewhere is maliciously pulling the strings, right? So the world is not out of your control if someone somewhere is deliberately doing these things to hurt you. Then there's a villain, then there's someone you can direct your anger at.
There's a fire hose of false information, memes and hashtags spewed at us from multiple platforms, shared millions of times.
Hold up, wait a minute. It's a chopper.
And fiction morphs into what some mistakenly believe is fact. Conspiracies that lived online have now burst out into the real world.
I think Americans need to realize their freedoms are being taken away, and if they don't stand up for them right now, there won't be any freedom to stand up for.
Online conspiracists have cobbled together a narrative, not grounded in any fact, that accuses powerful people like Bill Gates of releasing the virus as a ploy to launch a genocidal mass vaccination campaign.
For decades, Gates has been working on depopulation and dictatorial control plans on global politics.
This Italian MP even gave a long speech in Parliament about it, calling Bill Gates a vaccine criminal.
The real goal of all of this is total control.
The spread of such outlandish charges may seem silly, but the consequences could be catastrophic. If large portions of the public believe the intent of Gates and public health experts is nefarious, they could be convinced a coronavirus vaccine, if one is discovered, will be dangerous. Many may refuse it. There's evidence that's already starting. A poll in the U.S. found half of all Americans who name Fox News as their primary TV news source believe Bill Gates is plotting to use a COVID-19 vaccination campaign to implant microchips in billions of people to track their movements. 44% of voters who cast ballots for Donald Trump in 2016 believe it too, even though neither Fox nor Trump has promoted that theory. And a Canadian poll for the School of Journalism at Carleton University found nearly half of Canadians believed at least one of 4 conspiracy theories. 26% believed COVID-19 was engineered as a bioweapon in a Chinese lab and released into the general population. And then there's Plandemic.
For exposing their deadly secrets, the minions of Big Pharma waged war on Dr. Mikovits.
It looks like a slick documentary and is like gospel for believers.
Dr. Mikovits is naming names of those behind the plague of corruption that places all human life in danger.
The former research scientist who features in it makes lots of claims, not backed up by evidence, including that wearing a mask is dangerous because it activates your own virus. She was discredited in 2011 after the journal Science retracted her paper on a supposed link between a virus and chronic fatigue syndrome. Her fall from grace was steep.
She was arrested for a period of time, I think, for stealing lab equipment. So this was sort of a disreputable figure who had really become kind of a fringe conference speaker since her paper was retracted. But at this particular point in time, she had a new book out and claimed that her paper was retracted and other things had happened to her that were bad in her career because of Anthony Fauci, who has risen to a position of prominence in the United States in our government's response to COVID.
On May 4th, Plandemic was posted to Facebook, YouTube, and Vimeo. It spread unchecked, and in just over a week was shared, linked, viewed, and commented on more than 8 million times. 2 million on Facebook alone.
There's a lot of overlap in conspiratorial communities online. There's research that shows that if you believe in one conspiracy theory, you're likely to believe in others. So in the case of Plandemic, what you started to see was the QAnon community picked it up. And this is a conspiratorial community in the United States. And the QAnon community has a lot of overlap with what we can call the kind of more mainstream pro-Trump, pro-President Trump community. The MAGA community, if you will, Make America Great Again.
On May 11th, YouTube, Facebook, and Vimeo took the video down, and fact-checkers have worked to debunk it. But it lives on and keeps being shared. Facts aren't as sexy as a conspiracy.
When you're sharing something that's being billed as, here is the secret dark truth of the way of the world, that's much more interesting and compelling and more likely to get someone to click. You have to create content that's emotionally resonant.
Hey everybody, it's Dr. Zubin Damania, aka...
Actual medical experts, like this Stanford-trained doctor, are pushing back with their own online videos.
I can't believe I'm wasting my time doing this, but I just want to stop getting messages about it because it's really frustrating to think that people are this freaking stupid.
This one, Debunking Plandemic, has been viewed on YouTube more than 3 million times.
You should look at the credibility of the people who are trying to convince you that they're right when they don't have any science to prove it.
The UN is working to counter the conspiracies, too.
We're partnering with an organization called First Draft News that is closely monitoring the spreading of misinformation, where it's coming from. And we will prioritize audiences that are receiving this misinformation and sharing it as well.
It's hoping to mobilize millions of digital first responders to counter misinformation. Blaming 5G cell towers for spreading the disease has led to arson attacks in Quebec and around the world. Accusations China manufactured the virus have led to racist insults and assaults. And Bill Gates, who 5 years ago warned the biggest potential killer the world faced is not war, but a pandemic, and who has spent billions on life-saving vaccines, is now public enemy number one to conspiracy theorists, who are infecting millions with misinformation that could be as dangerous as the virus itself.
Where does this leave the news consumer? Well, with me is Craig Silverman. He's media editor of BuzzFeed. He's an award-winning author and journalist and one of the world's leading experts on online misinformation. He started using the term fake news back in 2014, long before President Trump weaponized it. Craig, you have edited a verification handbook on media manipulation, and in it, you make the point that everything in the digital world can be gamed and manipulated, and there are a variety of people and entities with incentives to do it. Now that that world has met this real-world virus, what has it led to?
I feel like it's a high watermark in terms of conspiracy theories, misinformation, disinformation, just a wide range of, very confusing, often misleading information polluting our environment. And we've sort of been leading up to this point to a certain extent. Things have progressively kind of been getting a little bit worse and worse. But you have a massive global event like a pandemic, which naturally unleashes conspiracy theories. You do that in this digital environment, and this is what we're experiencing right now, a really high watermark in terms of this false and misleading info.
What's the onus on social media platforms who all profit from this junk to refuse to let it live on their sites? We've seen Twitter fact-check President Trump's tweets for the first time, not about coronavirus, actually, but mail-in ballots. Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg, though, says it's not up to platforms to be truth police. What is your view?
Well, they absolutely have responsibility here, and they have acknowledged that responsibility. If we think about how things have changed since the end of 2016, they were doing very little to almost nothing to combat false and dangerous claims on their platform. And now pretty much every major platform has teams that are dedicated to reviewing this information. Facebook funds dozens of fact checkers around the world. So it's kind of a strange thing when Mark Zuckerberg comes out and says, well, it's not up to us to be the arbiters of truth. they also talk out of the other side of their mouth, saying how much they've invested in the kind of efforts to rid their platform of dangerous and misleading and false information.
So when he says he doesn't think they should be truth police, you think that specifically relates to politicians?
Yes. I mean, that's the only sort of interpretation of that comment that could make it partially true, because they absolutely are helping arbitrate and decide on the veracity of content. Now, they've outsourced that to a certain extent to third-party fact checkers, but Facebook has introduced the program. It's spending millions and millions of dollars a year on people whose job description is absolutely falling into the arbiters of truth level. And Facebook has decided that they don't want fact checkers fact-checking political ads, and they don't want them fact-checking political speech. And that in itself is a pretty controversial line to draw.
Let's talk about the Plandemic video. It was taken down from a number of sites, but, you know, it keeps popping up and it's being shared anyway. Is there a way that that can actually be stopped, or is the online ecosystem just too big, too ungovernable, that it's never going to happen?
I think it is a really good example of perhaps what we can expect from these platforms, at least at this moment in time. And the reality is that they are too big for them to actually be able to enforce them completely. And so something like the Plandemic really exploits that, because they know that, sure, maybe at some point it gets fact-checked and it starts to be flagged for removal by Facebook itself, but they know that they can get it uploaded by other people. In fact, the filmmaker, when he released it, he said, listen, everyone, go download the film because we know it's going to get removed and we want you to re-upload it elsewhere. So it was really part of their marketing campaign, you could say.
Craig, there's misinformation, which is spreading wrong information, and disinformation, which is deliberately spreading wrong information designed to deceive. What do we know about who is doing this when it comes to COVID-19? Is it individuals or state actors or both?
We've got a wide range of different actors with different motivations. And so you talked about misinformation. It's an important distinction. I think there are a lot of very well-meaning people who are uncertain, who are looking for guidance and help around navigating this novel coronavirus, and they will at times unintentionally spread false and misleading information. So there is a lot of that happening. And then you have the sort of deliberate bad actors. And frankly, they factor in those well-meaning people. They try to design their disinformation so it appeals to the beliefs, to the biases, to the fears of all of us, which might cause us to not only consume it, but to then reshare it. And in terms of those bad actors, with the coronavirus, we're certainly seeing a lot of kind of existing alternative health influencers, people who've already staked out their turf, whether it's anti-vaccine activists or people like that, who are really seizing this as their moment to spread their particular message. There is state involvement. In particular, if you look right now, there's a huge propaganda war being waged between the US and China over the origins of the virus and blame for it. And there are other state actors involved as well. But I also think we have to be aware that a lot of people are thinking that a vaccine is going to be the moment when all of this starts to recede. But that's actually going to be the moment when very organized health disinformation communities like anti-vaccine activists are going to be moving to the next level of their campaign to try and create doubt and fear around a vaccine.
Do you think that conspiracy theories around that and COVID-19 generally could become as dangerous as the virus itself?
I think it could potentially be even worse in the sense that if you actually create hesitancy among the population to take a vaccine that has gone through the proper procedures and been tested, just like, you know, so many of the vaccines we all get as a regular part of our life, and vaccines that have saved hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of lives around the world over time. And these last few months have been high water marks for disinformation and misinformation. I'm very worried about the groundwork being laid to really cast doubt about vaccines, and which could cause potentially more death and more suffering.
Still ahead, restriction roulette.
The best way to solve the economic crisis is to solve the public health crisis.
The truth and consequences of opening up too soon. Plus, a mayday for malls?
Well, I don't think that they're going to be irrelevant, but I definitely think that they're going to be changing.
The new reality for shopping centers and the people who work there. And up next,
it was a total whim.
From chickens to puppies, the animals filling our pandemic void.
As we adjust to this new reality, some members of our families have been big fans of it pretty much since day one. Our pets, especially dogs, are getting more FaceTime with their humans than they have possibly ever. And what do we get back? Well, all that unconditional love, at least from the dogs. Cats, of course, give it when they feel like it. A lot of people have decided this is the opportune time to get a new pet. And our Mike Drolet is one of them.
Check out this handsome guy. No. Look down. The other handsome guy. That's Magnus the pug, a 4-month-old memory-making pandemic puppy. Pugs, if you didn't know, really like to zoom around. And the cure to the zoomies, we've since learned, is a collar and leash.
Let's go for a walk.
His stubbornness has been remarkable.
Trying to go for a morning walk as opposed to...
but entertaining in a way that it's exactly what my family needed after being thrust into isolation. For my little girl, this pandemic puppy has been everything.
Come on!
Remember the early days of isolation? Our feelings were all over the place. Scared, sad, frustrated, and bored. In Calgary, Chelsea Simpson found herself at home with little to do, and then she remembered a conversation with her dad.
Basically, my dad told me about a year ago if I could keep a plant alive for a year, he'd get me a puppy.
Well, the plant lived, so now she has Beans, a mini poodle she's slightly obsessed with.
So cute, so cute. He's very precious.
With limited human interaction, Beans, much like Magnus, has filled a void, and not just in her life. It should come as no surprise Beans has an Instagram page, which is far more popular than she ever dreamed it would be.
People are pretty interested in his day-to-day activities, so I think people are just kind of bored. But it's been fun. Like my friends obviously love watching him on social media.
If there's one thing people initially had a lot of, it was time. Certain things became scarce: toilet paper and cleaning products, the Nintendo Switch video game system, and dogs. The Toronto Humane Society placed 71 dogs into foster homes in February, and then 141 in March. Scammers took note, putting up fake ads for puppies. The Anti-Fraud Center saw almost as many cases in the first 4 months of 2020 as it did all of last year. And young Kendrick Radmore had his sights set on a Havanese puppy he wants to name Speedy, except the breeder his family chose had already sold the first 2 litters of the year.
So we're actually the 3rd litter this year, which is not till August.
So while they know the puppy is coming, they also have to wait, which isn't going to be easy, even for a 6-year-old with so much compassion for animals. He asked his friends to donate to a zoo or sanctuary in lieu of birthday presents.
Just waiting. Well, we're doing a lot of studying. We get to learn a lot about this dog before we get the dog. Yeah.
It shouldn't be much of a surprise to anyone that puppies have become the pandemic super pet. How do we know this? Science. Studies have shown that dogs have the innate ability to reduce stress in our lives, and they know when to step in because they're able to read our facial expressions. So in essence, every dog has the potential to be Paw Patrol. But dogs also take a commitment level not everyone can offer, which is why the Yips pandemic puppy is actually a pair of chickens.
Bring in the chicken for dinner a few times.
They've rented until the fall.
Coco is beautiful and stupid. Vanilla is smart and stubborn.
Every day, Coco and Vanilla offer up a fresh egg and then spend the day running around doing chicken things before going back to their coop. The spectacle of it all has become surprisingly therapeutic for the cooped-up kids.
It was a total whim. I guess I had this latent urge to have livestock, but I figured this is the only summer we're going to be here the entirety of it. We're not traveling, and I needed something to get them off iPads.
Saying goodbye in the fall to Coco the stupid and Vanilla the stubborn will be hard, just as a return to normalcy will be on the dogs who have gotten used to having their new best friends around all day long.
Let's go.
But right now, I better go walk the dog again.
Come on. Let's go.
Coming up,
Slow and steady wins the race.
To open or not to open.
There's no perfect formula. No country has the perfect formula.
How Canada and the world are getting back to business. The biggest challenge all countries face right now is striking the right balance between easing the economy back towards something near normal while not risking getting so many people congregating together that the virus takes hold all over again. It raises the question, how fast is too fast? As summer approaches, especially in places where infection rates are low, some are already ignoring physical distancing guidelines and not wearing masks. And businesses can't stay closed indefinitely. The economic impact is massive. More than 40 million Americans have filed jobless claims. It hasn't been that bad since the Great Depression. In Canada, it's estimated over $40 billion has been paid out to Canadians who applied for the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. And the virus has not vanished. We still don't have any weapon against it. If we reopen too fast, there's a risk. It's a matter of life and death, and prosperity or poverty. To explore this, I'm joined by Dr. Peter Singer. He is Special Advisor to the Director General of the World Health Organization, and he happens to be Canadian. Dr. Singer is in Geneva. Dr. Singer, thanks for taking the time. The World Health Organization is constant in its messaging that we're not near the end of this pandemic. In fact, we're still at the beginning. As restrictions begin to be eased, what is your greatest concern?
Well, the greatest concern is that the virus resurges. And so the restrictions have to be eased slowly, carefully, in a stepwise way. And that's actually the way to deal with that fear.
The modern world, of course, has never been through anything like this. As you watch countries tackle this, taking different approaches to reopening, are there basic guidelines on best practice?
Yes, there are. And the key, the real heart of the guideline, and the guideline that's put out by the World Health Organization, is to break the chain of transmission, to find the virus, to find the cases, isolate the cases, trace the contacts, quarantine the contacts. From a Canadian perspective, you might say put the virus in the penalty box. That is at the heart of guidelines on easing restrictions.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, South Korea is used as the example of doing that, the contact tracing, the testing, the quarantining. And they kept COVID-19 from spreading better than a lot of other countries. But now there's a spike in cases there as well. And South Korea is shutting down public spaces. Bars, clubs, and sporting venues are being advised to close. What does that tell you?
Tells me that there's no perfect formula. No country has the perfect formula. Even the best countries, the best practices here run into setbacks and then need to recalibrate that. And we see that not just in South Korea, but actually in every country that's doing well. And that says that the trick here is to go slow and steady. Slow and steady wins the race. And also it's very important for countries to learn from each other because they all follow a slightly different path. And it will be important, I think, for not just Canada as a whole, but different parts of Canada to learn from different countries and parts of other countries, because it's a very variable situation, and that cross-learning is really critical.
Let me ask you about the antibody tests. You know, there was a lot of hope that they would be used to show who can safely go back to work. Now there's evidence, of course, that they're not that reliable. What's the latest advice from the WHO on antibody tests?
There's many of those on the market. WHO doesn't feel we're at the point where there's enough validity testing, enough data really behind any of them to rely upon them, certainly not for clinical decisions, even though in the context of research, they are used, for example, to see in a hard-hit community what proportion of people have antibodies. And that number, by the way, Donna, is disturbing because on average, let's say it's 10%, that means 90% of the people are still vulnerable to the virus, which is why easing back on lockdowns or watching the virus spread around the world is so concerning, because most of the world is still vulnerable to this virus. And that's why there's really no cause for complacency.
You know, poverty kills too, not as quickly as this virus, but having people out of work leads to financial hardship and bankruptcy and psychological distress and domestic abuse. So can the world really afford to wait until we get a vaccine to fully reopen?
The health consequences and the economic consequences are often pitted against each other, one or the other. That's not really maybe the best way to characterize it, because the economic consequences flow from the health consequences. You know, there's trillions of dollars that have been lost here. But at the heart of that is the public health problem. It is the virus. Is the best way to solve the economic crisis is to solve the public health crisis.
Do you think it's likely that we are going to have to keep living physically distant lives for a long, long time?
You know, I think that the idea of a magic bullet that one day we'll snap our fingers and this will all be gone in an instant. I think we really have to take a reality check on that idea. A vaccine certainly could help. Highly effective therapies could help. But we're still, for the foreseeable future, for the months ahead, going to have to live with this virus, going to have to accommodate to it, and hopefully one day soon there will be a vaccine.
Next on The New Reality,
there's no way to get around it or candy coat it.
A retail crisis.
And that's going to be really painful, not just for some brands, but it'll be painful for consumers as well.
Will COVID-19 mean the end of the shopping mall?
So many things we used to take for granted are now off limits, from hugging old friends to going to the mall. COVID-19 has changed how we shop. Congregating in malls to shop or just to hang out seems a long way off right now. Even before the pandemic was declared, many were struggling to survive. Not all of them will, and those that do are in for some big changes. Sean O'Shea explains.
Well, I don't think that they're going to be irrelevant, but I definitely think that they're going to be changing.
We're going to see a big rethink in terms of what a quote-unquote shopping center really is, and if it's even legitimate to call it a shopping center anymore.
Or if they had not great reason to go 4 months ago, they're going to have much less reason to go in 4 months or by 2021.
That trip to the mall, when it's possible, may not be the same. Some Canadians may decide never to go back there, and that may affect thousands of lives.
We are going to have a crisis in the commercial real estate market. There's no way to get around it or candy coat it.
The cost to people who work these malls of commerce could be enormous, according to futurist Doug Stevens. Clients pay him to look down the retail road, and the view isn't good.
We could be facing a retail refugee crisis. In fact, you know, it is the largest employer in the country, the retail and hospitality industries.
The COVID-19 pandemic has left shopping malls in much of the country closed, including in Ontario.
To get people back to the malls, they will need to really convince people that they're safe and that there's something to go for.
That sense of purpose at retail malls has been flagging for years, according to journalist Marina Strauss. She spent 40 years as a reporter at the Globe and Mail, the last 20 covering the retail sector.
The activities became more blah. It became easier to shop online.
Blah is a far cry from how shopping malls were conceived back in the 50s.
Now let's see just how shopping can be fun, real fun, at this modern and convenient shopping center.
One of the first malls, Hillsdale, built in San Mateo, California. It was 1956.
Yes, shopping is fun at Hillsdale. And because it is, we believe that people have come to know us in more ways than one.
60 years ago, the one-stop shopping mall retailers considered stay-at-home suburban mothers their target audience.
And to give mother a little more freedom for her shopping.
Original vision of it back in the 50s, that it was really about a place where community came together and services were clustered together.
Shopping malls were typically anchored by a large department store tenant, In the U.S., that meant stores like Macy's.
At Eaton's, you'll always find the look that's right for you.
Look, there it is. It's perfect.
And in Canada, names like Eaton's.
Oh, yeah. Richard will love it.
Eaton's collapsed in debt 2 decades ago. Sears, which bought it, went out of business 2 years ago. And 118-year-old J.C. Penney, one of the oldest American department stores, filed for bankruptcy just 2 weeks ago. COVID-19 didn't create the problems faced by the retail industry. They've faced failure after failure for decades. But the pandemic is speeding up the pace of the shopping mall's evolution.
What COVID-19 is really doing is it's pushing the retail industry out of the industrial age of retail and into the digital age of retail. And that's going to be really painful, not just for some brands, but it'll be painful for consumers as well, just in terms of the changing shopping habits that are going to be required.
It's one thing to line up in a pandemic for necessities like groceries, but even for essentials and most everything else, there's no longer much need.
The internet is the biggest big box store in the world. Anything I want is in that store 24 hours a day.
Amazon feeds a rising consumer demand for choice and speed. No driving to a shopping center, the product comes to you. So who even needs the shopping mall?
We are going to see stores close. We are going to see more dark spaces in malls. That's not going to attract more people either.
When retailers really begin closing stores, as we suspect they will and have already begun to do so, and when they really start rethinking the size of the footprint and saying, could we take a 200,000 square foot store down to 50,000 square feet? We're going to see a real crisis in terms of who now takes those spaces.
While Ontario has yet to reopen malls, British Columbia relaxed restrictions and gave the green light. Even so,
it's great if people feel comfortable, but not me.
Alberta's allowed malls to reopen too, but initially at least, there's not that much appetite for shopping.
We could have a lot of consumers that are in much, much worse financial health than they were only 6 months ago.
Meaning mall stores may reopen, but shoppers won't automatically show up. Stores that do survive may not need as much space as they had, opting instead to focus strictly on their brand, not huge footprints with stock on hand.
It may just be a showroom that people come in and see it and be able to shop it, and the product is shipped to them at a separate time.
Smaller spaces, cheaper to rent, fewer staff, and less money needed to pay them. The future may be worse for retailers occupying aging malls in smaller communities where there's little allure.
And it was just crowds of people and the same old. Malls all look the same.
Their space could give way to new users, recreational and residential, as online shopping, driven by a pandemic, alters the way we sell and buy.
I don't predict a death at all of the shopping center. I think it is, what will it become?
We will get beyond the health crisis. We will repair the economic damage. And my only hope is that we find that in actual fact, what the industry did was not, it didn't die, it just shed its skin. It just shed about 100 years of old legacy retailers, and that we have new, exciting retailers that are coming into a market that might arguably have a lot lower real estate prices to allow them into it.
Coming up.
I'm Corrine.
And I'm Eli.
And we're having a baby in the time of coronavirus.
A pandemic pregnancy that ended with a big bundle of joy. We've got some happy news to share with you, the miracle of new life. Back on Mother's Day weekend, we introduced you to Corrine and Elias. They were expecting a baby and shared their journey of what it was like to be pregnant during a pandemic. Well, the pregnancy is over and parenthood has begun.
Introducing Anderson Kit Campbell.
He was born May 20th at 7 pounds, 8 ounces.
He's pretty long, and he's got some pretty big hands and feet, but we will definitely keep him. Right, buddy?
They're calling him Andy, and he's home safe and sound. The birth didn't go exactly as planned. It rarely does. In a few weeks, Corrine and Elias will take us through that chapter of their story, a story of new life and new beginnings. Finally tonight, a hopeful note about someone at a different stage in their life. 78-year-old Judy Carson has been discharged after 7 weeks at Royal Victoria Hospital in Barrie, Ontario. 3 of them in intensive care. Her family was told she might not make it. She got COVID-19 while on a cruise with her husband. Those who cared for her were as happy as she was that she's going home. They sent her off in style. She calls them her heroes. Thanks for watching. Good night.